Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Selleck. I am the founder of 51 Labs, a marketing agency for the middle market. I'm today's moderator, and we have a four-part agenda today. Before I kind of get into that agenda, I would like to just kind of reiterate that we want this to be a lively discussion with the panelists, which Sam is going to be introducing shortly, as well as an introduction to Woodlake Group. If you have comments, if you have questions, please drop those into the chat room. I will be working to be scanning them, and we'll get to them at the end, where John Finger, who is a partner at McGuire Woods, he will be leading the section of this webinar with the Q&A. So I'd like to turn it over to our sponsor, Sam Seraphim, who is the founding partner of Woodlake Group, for a quick introduction.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'll take a couple of minutes of your time to tell you about us. Woodlake is a private investment firm. We've invested in real estate and mostly private equity in 10 industry sectors through 15 platforms with enterprise values ranging from $20 to $200 million. In 3+ decades, we've invested through multiple cycles: recessions, the Great Recession, high inflation, stagflation, 2 Gulf Wars, revolutions, SARS, MERS, etc., etc., etc. But through it all, we've survived. This is a real bad situation. COVID-19 is unique in its devastation in both human and economic terms. It's been particularly destructive to the aerospace industry, and no one has a real clear idea about where we're going and what's going to happen next. A number of steps have to be taken by government, by industry, by investors, by the banks. So we're going to talk about some of these. We decided at Woodlake to gather prominent professionals in complementary areas to share thoughts about aerospace and to obtain a clearer picture of how to prepare for the future. We're led by Mark Paganini, Woodlake partner. Mark was CEO of Airbus's helicopter business in the US for about 15 years, grew it to $1 billion in revenue. I think it's now the leading, if not the top, helicopter provider in the US. Woodlake is spearheading this webinar because aerospace is critical. For the GDP, it represents 5%. It employs 11 million people. Globally, it's 30 million people. And it's without it, can you imagine life without aerospace or aircrafts or aviation or cargo shipped by air? So it's critical. Air traffic has grown at 7% a year since 2016. In 2020, people anticipate traffic revenue is going to drop by 65% compared to 2019. We're gathered here because we don't have any solutions. We're here to look for patterns, anticipate green shoots in this dismal situation, and consider opportunities. We believe aerospace has received a body blow, but it will come back, probably not exactly in the same form, but it will return as it has previously. You remember when we had deregulation and Freddie Laker with People's Express in the 80s and a whole slew of aircrafts and airlines. It comes back. It's too important an industry not to come back. The remaining panelists are, apart from Mark Paganini, I've said a few words about him. The leading deal attorney at McGuire Woods is John Finger. The next panelist is the prominent government affairs attorney at McGuire Woods, Greg Walden. The head of aerospace and defense at CIT Bank is John Haskin. Head of Aerospace and Defense at William Blair Investment Banking is Gordy Vapp. And you've met Mark, you've met Jordan Selleck, and he's co-moderator with John Finger.
We already did the intros. Let's do a quick intro as we're waiting for Mark to join. But then we're going to dive into an industry update. This is going to be a 10-minute section where Mark is going to kind of give us an update of where the industry is at. Next, we're going to give a regulatory update by McGuire Woods with John and Greg. And then the M&A and lending update from John Heskin, as well as Gordy Vapp. Gordy's at William Blair and John is at CIT.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining. I'm a partner at McGuire Woods. in Dallas, part of the private equity and M&A group. I do a fair amount of work within the aerospace industry, so excited to be part of the webinar today, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, I'm an aviation attorney, also an aviation lobbyist. I served as chief counsel of the FAA in the Reagan and Bush 41 administrations and have practiced aviation law since that time, represented almost every aspect of the transportation industry and the aviation industry, and I'm happy to participate in this webinar.
Great. Gordy?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Gordy Vapp. I run the aerospace and defense practice at William Blair, primarily focused on mergers and acquisitions, and been banking for about 15 years prior to 9 years in the Air Force.
So John Heskin, I lead the aerospace and defense and government services practice at CIT. We have a team of 8 professionals spread across the country from LA to Washington, DC, and our headquarters is in New York. I've been with the group since 2007 in various roles, including risk management, and then now originations and the group head of the group. We focus on private equity leverage lending as well as asset transactions in the space. So we'll do cash flow based transactions, APLs, and we'll lend also against the metal. So we have I think a good purview into different facets of the industry.
Greg, can you please do the industry update? I'm going to shut everyone's video off so we can focus on Greg. I'm going to share the screen and do the regulatory update. Please bear with me as I get this set up.
Yes, there we go. There we go. Well, the CARES Act was signed March 27th. It seems like a year ago, right? It was certainly a necessary piece of legislation for the airline industry, but not even close to sufficient. And as the program started to be developed and implemented by Treasury, a lot of them became the programs became less attractive to a lot of airlines and those also covered by these programs. The grant program, the payroll support program, that money can only be used for payroll expenses. The airline can't furlough or lay off any employees or even reduce their pay through September 30th. And then Secretary Mnuchin said, well, okay, yeah, it's a grant program, but as for 30%, the major airlines, I'm going to convert it to a loan, and we'll take an interest. As for the loan and loan guarantee program, I think most of you that looked at this initially said, oh, okay, we are okay with executive compensation limits. We're okay with no stock buybacks. We're okay with no dividends. And that's true. For the life of the guarantee plus 1 year, you can't do those things. But also, you're not able to reduce your workforce more than 10% below what you had on March 24th. A lot of furloughs took place before March 24th, and that requirement exists through September 30th. And of course, the Secretary can't give a loan or loan guarantee without taking a warrant or equity interest, and it doesn't make a difference whether the airline is publicly traded or not. So it looks like the industry would need additional relief in the next congressional package called COVID-4. We don't know when that's going to come. There was some thought that there was so much momentum that we would have something by Memorial Day. That's not the case. The HEROES Act, introduced by the House Democrats, is a wish list, and the Republicans don't want to go there. So it may be June before there's more relief, and maybe airlines will not be singled out and focused, but it will be broader relief for industry, but remains to be seen. So next slide. So the Trump administration, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, next slide, please. Trump administration is trying to do things, and now I'm not talking about the White House, I'm talking about DOT, FAA, and Department of Homeland Security. They can operate at the margins. I do believe they'll be critical to recovery of the airline industry, but they can't, the situation is largely out of their control. And you have an interesting play where DOT, which has been deregulatory for 30 years, is called upon to regulate. FAA, which is a aviation safety agency, is called upon to regulate health of employees and passengers. And TSA, which is a security agency, is now involved in public health. But that is the nature of this crisis. The minimum service obligations, which were imposed by the CARES Act, really put a straitjacket on some airlines, and DOT has had to walk it back a bit and grant a lot of exemptions. The Essential Air Service Program, which goes back to deregulation 1978, is still there. And the minimum service obligations is kind of like a Essential Air Service Program on steroids. That still needs to be tweaked and adjusted. I'm not sure Congress has an appetite to relax what they put in law, and DOT therefore doesn't have total discretion to just say, look, it's not profitable, you don't have to carry that service. As for social distancing, there are a lot of calls that DOT should step in and say, look, airlines, you're going to not fill every other row, or you're going to leave the middle seat empty. I don't think that DOT is going to take that step. Airlines are taking steps on their own. Again, Congress could regulate this area or direct DOT to regulate on this area. Unlikely right now. I think it's going to be air carriers will accomplish that pursuant to CDC and other guidelines. As for the FAA, initially the administrator said, well, we do safety, we don't do health. Well, that question was answered in the 1980s when the Reagan administration didn't want to put any medical equipment on aircraft, saying that has nothing to do with the operation of the aircraft. And the Court of Appeals said, no, look, your safety and safety of passengers can be health and safety, and so FAA do it. So I think the FAA will eventually step up to the plate and working perhaps with OSHA, get involved with what protocols airlines need to adopt to at least reduce the risk of infection on the aircraft. The passenger briefing has not been changed, I guess, for 20 years, although when deep vein thrombosis hit, especially on long flights, a lot of airlines turned to adding that type of briefing. Now you'll have briefing on social distancing and other protocols. The FAA has already taken action to relax training and currency requirements. That's going to continue probably for the next year or so. That's not really saying that, well, we're going to reduce safety, but there are things that can't be done in person that can be done remotely, and the FAA, I think, will be has already shown a willingness to do that. And finally, the TSA. There are many calls that things should happen at the checkpoint, like temperature checks. The TSA has the personnel to do that. Do they have the training? And will it be effective? I think that is still a developing issue, and I don't know when we'll get closure on that. It certainly, TSA has the people to do that at scale if that's required.
Great, thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to John Heskin from CIT for a lender update.
So effectively, I'm asked to speak about the lending environment across aerospace, defense, and government. So I'll just handle it through the points on this line. So the industry segments, effectively, commercial aerospace has been, there's a lot of uncertainty, as everyone on the panel and I think a lot of the attendees could understand. The lending in commercial aerospace slowed quite dramatically across aftermarket, across OEM, as well, and then of course airlines. This is all stemming from the downturn in travel, which is creating a bunch of uncertainty, and it's a little bit difficult for the lending community to go in without a bottom being called. So I think people on the front lines in commercial aerospace are looking for more stability in cash flows in order to get back into the market. There are opportunities in commercial aerospace. We see it. We do have a nice view on the air cargo market, for example. So we're spending a lot of our resources on air cargo. We're spending a lot of time with existing clients. We have a lot of commercial aerospace clients that are involved in, as I mentioned earlier, aftermarket and the supply chain. So we're really that sector, but until a bottom is really called, we're not deploying a lot of capital there. Where we are doing a lot more is the defense and government services side, where there really is predictability in cash flows and with programs. So they're really coveted and sought after financings in the government space. Next topic is financing sources, and so I hit on that a little bit earlier. Some banks are pausing new money transactions. Others, and I think all of the banks are working with clients on relief packages and restructurings, just given, especially in the commercial aerospace sector, because those transactions have really hit. Some of those companies have really hit a rough patch. But I will say that most banks are definitely working with clients to address needs, and we view this as a temporary type situation. Although I think you'll hear from Gordy and others about the recovery scenarios. We're definitely dedicated to the space in CIT, so we're quite active right now with new money. But I think you'll also see, unless you're really a specialized lender in the space, I think general lenders are moving away. Or stepping away from the sector until, again, as I mentioned, until the bottom is called. Going to the next couple points, BDCs and CLOs. Effectively, pricing for securities and CLOs are under pressure as the quality of the underlying portfolios are downgraded and deteriorating. There's issues with the bonds getting, the cash flows, the underlying companies are not performing as well, so there's cash flow impact on the CLO market. As well as BDCs, the important part about how BDCs act is that they must mark to market on a quarterly basis. And given the fact that there's a lot of downgrades that are happening and asset values are declining, BDCs are not as active. They are looking for quality opportunities and higher yield premiums to enhance returns to kind of counteract some of the paid losses. And then funds are acting like a nice backstop, I would say, in the market. They're definitely arbitrage opportunities. Also focusing across capital from equity to debt. But I would also say that my observation has been a lot of these funds have been focused on debt transactions as some of the equity type transactions are a bit more risky in this environment. And then the bonds are definitely opening up, both for the high yield and investment grade. So I would say, right end of March to April, a little bit of choppiness, but things are opening up a bit. As you can see, that's certain types of companies and airlines are able to get paper in the market. And then some guidance on where we see leverage on pricing and structures like that. So generally speaking, the current pricing environment is 50 to 100 basis points higher than pre-COVID. It was a lot higher, I would say a month ago, but it's come down quite a bit. In terms of leverages, I'm speaking just for the banks at this point in time, 3x4 is really the topping out in the pro rata market in terms of leverage. But can be half to another point higher for a bank arranged term loan B type situation. And then finally, in terms of structures, we do a lot of transactions morphing into ABL, whereas a cash flow transaction might have been possible. So a lot of ABLs are being launched in the market. In terms of spreads, just to give you a data point, where I see the B-rated loans at LIBOR 550 to 650. The other interesting point is that given the interest rate environment, banks have been looking to implement LIBOR floors, anywhere from 50 to 100 in terms of an ABL, and 75 to 125 in the case of cash flow transactions. And then finally, underwrites. So I think everyone understands what an underwrite is. I think what's been happening lately is that there's less requirement in terms of transactions to underwrite. I think borrowers understand that underwrites are difficult in this point of time, and looking primarily for arrangements. However, the price point of an arrangement is now what the price point used to be for underwrites. And I think the last comment I'll make is that, again, CIT as a specialized lender in the space, we're definitely active and we're definitely looking for opportunities. Overall, I think everyone's being selective, but given the fact that we've been doing transactions in this space since 2006, we have a fair understanding of the cycles, and I'm available for any kind of questions after the panel. Thank you.
John, great. I'll turn it over to Gordy and get him to start his video.
And I think what you'll hear in my remarks around M&A status and the markets is that a lot of this is related to the leverage markets that John just hit on. And so at least half the questions we get from people are around what's going on in the leverage markets. And so it's good to hear, John, that you guys are open for business and looking at opportunities. This first slide won't hit too hard. I think most people understand that what is going on in the market with RPKs dropping precipitously. I think Greg, you were talking about, and John talking about hard to call the bottom. What is interesting here is you'll see some of the aftermarket financial results on a sales basis on the MRO side in the last cycle, and you can see how long it took for these aftermarket businesses to recover. If you flip to the next page, it's a little bit more of a granular look at stock prices and how they've moved in looking at three different categories: OEMs, supporters on the engine side, components, as well as MROs. And what you'll see on the top chart, which looks over multi-year, is a strong increase in all of those indices, and then a pretty precipitous drop. I think what you're seeing right now in some of the recovery from just a multiple standpoint, this is all with comps, from a multiple standpoint, you are seeing the fact that earnings have dropped and the market is still, I think, pricing in an eventual return, right, and not being quite as pessimistic as maybe some of the phone are, or at least as pessimistic as some of the CEOs that we've talked to are at least privately, as they plan for downside scenarios. Look to the next page, and this is where maybe a little bit more interested in not just data thrown at you guys, but rather some observations that we're seeing. So certainly echo what John said about, look, commercial aero is a little bit tough right now. And I think what we are seeing is that even those industry specialists, so in dedicated funds on the private equity side, or strategics, a little bit hesitant to call the bottom, or to at least make a prediction on RPKs, production rates, and all that sort of thing. That's hard when you have some of the more some of the smarter money at putting pause on new investments. In general, M&A had been on the OEM side had been a little bit muted going into COVID, primarily due to the 737 uncertainty, as well as some of the body production issues. We were already in a softening M&A market on the OEM side, and then COVID turned out to be really a backbreaker. With Hexcel and Woodward, that deal being called off is probably one of the most visible casualties. Switching to our private clients and companies, we'd say that almost every, John, you probably saw this, and it's because at least this, but every one of our commercial aero clients moved quickly to liquidity. That was taking the max on the on revolvers and existing lines of credit to draw down to make sure that they could weather the storm. And I think at least in the medium term, in the near term to the medium term, that liquidity remains pretty good among a lot of these businesses that are very impacted. And so I think right now, if you were to do a poll of private equity backed sponsor or private equity backed commercial aero businesses, as well as some of the public companies that you can go look at, they have good they have good liquidity, and will have good liquidity for another couple of months. And so, but kind of coming into the fall is where things are going to get more challenging for them as well as for their lenders. If we talk about bright spots, there's certainly on the, I'll call it commercial. It's not what a lot of people talk about commercial, but cargo remains a very bright spot. You're seeing increase in dedicated cargo demand, partially because we're all buying everything online through Amazon, and partially because with reduced passenger traffic, you don't have that belly capacity anymore. So cargo certainly represents a bright spot, and defense represents a bright spot as well. As we look at different deals that could make sense in this environment, we have certainly discussed cashless mergers with a number of participants in the space. And the idea being, company A's been, aftermarket company has been crushed with the downturn in miles flown. Company B has been crushed too, so at least getting to a relative value is a little bit easier than trying to do a cash transaction where you're debating whether 2019 is the right metric to look at or 2020. So we think there could be some increased merger activity as people try to bulk up on scale, save, create some more operating leverage, and protect liquidity. On the public side, we're seeing quite a bit of interest in pipes, more specifically converts. And in that case, like a convert can be a pretty interesting instrument, since it allows the issuer to issue essentially debt now with a pretty high convert price that they believe more accurately reflects the long-term equity value, and the investor gets that same gets that downside protection. So we're seeing that momentum in the converts market pick up pretty considerably, and that's outside of aerospace and even outside defense, but really across the markets. If you look back to the last downturn, I think there was this sense coming out of 08, 09 that the only thing that was going to ever grow again was the government. Like now, we were shoveling money into government programs. So there is, back then there was a huge increased interest in mil aerospace and just defense exposure in general. And you saw companies make some pretty strong M&A moves into the defense side, and that made a lot of sense. At the time, it was kind of the conventional wisdom, made sense, right up until it stopped making as much sense. And that's as the economy recovered, commercial demand picked up again, and then simultaneously, after shoveling money into the economy, the government started looking at cutting costs and a little bit of fiscal responsibility with sequester, et cetera. So, long way of saying is that I think that there will probably be a pivot to defense in the near to medium term. I think that right now, neither party is going to be eager to remove dollars from the system, from the defense markets. So what I would anticipate is that regardless of who wins in November, dollars keep getting spent. But I do think around 2023, 2024, at the next presidential election, we'll have had an increase in commercial demand. We'll have had a pretty full recovery there at that point. And as a result, in the general economic recovery, you'll have politicians looking at defense cuts. So long way of saying, I think military is good for the kind of the near to the medium term. I would sort of be careful about what's going forward kind of past 2024. And then finally, I think what we're seeing on the general aviation side is that there's a hope that will respond, that will rebound faster than commercial. I think commercial is just a big question mark, and you can certainly make a case that GA business aviation could even emerge a little bit stronger post COVID. So that would welcome any questions in the Q&A session. Can be a little bit more specific, and feel free to follow up with me offline as well.
Great, Gordy, I appreciate that. So, So Mark just joined. Mark, can you hear us?
See what the situation of the industry. First traffic, then airlines, and then OEMs challenge. And we will see this challenge and opportunity for the financial institution. So in slide 1, you can see that the traffic almost stopped worldwide. Before we had cycle and local disruption as SARS and 9/11, the financial crisis of 2009 had a strong impact, which lasted about 2 years. But this time, this is a serious situation, which threatened the existence of many players in the industry. As you can see on the graph, traffic has come almost to a halt when GDP dipped significantly as well. So how do we see the traffic returning? I think the Q3, the quarter 3 will be important, but it will be slow. We think that it's going to be first a rebound in domestic air travel. And the domestic air travel, the 2 largest ones are the US and China. So we have to follow what's going on in the third quarter in the US and China. But overall, the traffic will follow GDP. Forecast show a small improvement in Q3. Everything will depend on that. So the 2 most important things anyway are to the recovery of traffic are testing, treatment, vaccine, and then GDP growth recovery. So now for the airline, next slide. How to survive, how to avoid bankruptcy and reorganize for the future. Today it's a month-by-month survival. First, they have done that, seek government help and borrow money, but it's only short-term. Long-term action is needed. So to survive, they need to preserve cash. To give you an idea, today, Southwest Airlines is burning $30 million a day. American Airlines is burning $50 million a day. So how to preserve the cash? How to prevent this bleeding? First, try to keep the cash from the ticket issued. Park and retire aircraft. The old one are the most costly in terms of fuel consumption and in terms of maintenance. If you look at the picture, it's interesting because you have 3 747, 4-engine aircraft. This aircraft will be retired of service, as well as the 340 aircraft, as well as the A380. Then get cash through sale and lease back of assets, of aircraft, reduce workforce and reduce costs drastically, and negotiate deferrals of lease payments and delivery, cancel orders when you can. It's a big, big negotiation these days between the manufacturer and the airline and the leasing company. Then you have to give customers confidence to fly again. This is all about sanitization of plane, testing, cleaning, air filtering, distanciation, but also incentive to fly. And finally, plan for a 30-40% traffic reduction. The impact of the crisis will last 3 to 4 years. So restructure the airline and adapt to a possible different mix between leisure and business, domestic and international. So what about the evolution of the airline market? This crisis will bring opportunities to reorganize, restructure, and be more profitable. The drop in traffic will generate bankruptcy, restructuring, reorganization. This will reduce the number of airlines. The survivor likely will be the one held by government, the so-called flag carriers, and the one who have kept cash, refinance, and reorganize. All of this will probably lead to a network reduction of destination to optimize profitability, and this probably will lead to reduced competition, driving higher fares. There will be government influence on the choice of airline bailed out, with influence on the management and strategy, with new standards in terms of sanitization and environment. And finally, priority will be given by the airline and the manufacturer to new, more efficient aircraft, smaller, long-range aircraft, with lower fuel consumption and maintenance costs. So the winner in the future on this market will be the A320 family, the MAX for Boeing when it's going to fly again, and the 787 and the 350. The other type of aircraft may have a difficult future. So now what about the OEMs and the supply chain? Fundamentally, they have the same challenge as airlines. They need to reduce cash burn, borrow from banks, seek government help, and swiftly reduce production rate. Airbus has already cut 30% production, and Boeing is doing the same, but they may have to do more in the coming months. They will have to work with unions on a workforce reduction to get the flexibility needed. They have already more or less announced that 10,000 or more jobs will be shared at Boeing and Airbus. And they have also to cut costs, including R&D. Very important also for the industry is to help suppliers survive. This is key in aerospace supply chain. They have already done it, to pay them quickly, to get them cash from banks and government. That's key because the value of the supply chain is huge in the total value chain of the aerospace industry. And the manufacturer also, in this difficult time, they must not lose customer, and they need to hold their price structure. They have to negotiate deferrals with airlines and avoid cancellation. In fact, the issue for the manufacturer is not really this year, because most of the aircraft are financed. The issue is more in 2021 and 2022, where the aircraft to be delivered at this date are not yet fully financed. Then the manufacturer have to develop, increase their defense business. Since the defense market will stay very strong, and it's also going to be a way for government to funnel cash to a strategic industry. But finally, the OEMs have to be very careful to avoid the government to take too much influence in the company in terms of workforce, in terms of purchase, in terms of environment, carbon emission, and returns for shareholders. Boeing just did that. It tapped the financial market and is relying on a strong defense market, and it didn't take the bailout from the government. So next slide is interesting to look at the China air traffic by mid-April. What we see in China is likely to happen in the rest of the world. A quick recovery in the third and the fourth quarter, but stalling, as you can see on the graph, I believe, until a vaccine is available and there is strong GDP recovery. So, what are the challenges and opportunities? The industry will not disappear. The crisis will force restructuring, as we discussed it, and hopefully be more profitable on the long run. The leasing company, banks, and investors will play an important role in the recovery. The leasing company, provided they are well funded, will structure a sell and lease back. They will purchase aircraft on the market, and they will negotiate deferrals of rentals. The bank still will provide loans secured by free assets. And there will be opportunity to invest in this market in identifying the winner, such as the companies doing sanitization of planes, interiors. The demand for business jet, for timeshare and chartering may get a good boost also, and the pilot training, because you will still need some pilots in the future, because the age pyramid is still very old. If we talk about the sanitization of planes, if you look at the discussion today, filtration systems are at the center of the attention today. And it's a boost for companies who have been specializing in that. Companies like Paul Aerospace, Donaldson Aerospace and Defense, Safran, and others. Finally, defense budget will remain strong, will be a way to funnel cash for OEM, it will fund also R&D. So balanced commercial defense company will certainly be the winner in the coming years. So what about the future in a few words? In a contracted market, there will be opportunities to improve profitability on medium long run for surviving company. The mass low-cost transportation by air may be challenged, as well as extensive business travel. But there will be a reduced number of players refocusing on defense budget and higher margin business. Environment challenge, especially in Europe, will also force the industry to redefine itself. But the new generation of plane will not arrive before 2030, 2040, hybrid or electric plane to address this challenge. So the existing planes and the service associated will continue to shape the market. And then there will be also new opportunities arising in the next few years, such as urban mobility. This is a very big market which is going to happen in the next 10 years. It has been valued at about $75 billion, and major companies are already working on it. That's the end of my presentation, Jordan.
John, what I'm going to do is stop the share here, open up the video for all panelists, and John, over to you for the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Gordy, quick question, maybe for you. I think the CEO of Boeing raised some eyebrows a few days ago. Whether it was inside baseball or not, kind of forecasting that we would see a material bankruptcy in the airline sector later this year. What are you hearing in the market around, obviously putting crystal ball out there? Are you hearing anything in the market around that people might be aware of as it trickles through?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think in the near term, liquidity is okay, right? And I'm talking broader supply chain, right? Not just the airlines. There's certainly a lot of speculation that the Boeing comment was meant to spur some additional political action, as also to just sort of warn Washington that if you make the strings attached to these aid packages too stringent, then you don't have people taking them. And I know certainly that's impacted, so I think he had, a couple of audiences there. One to, maybe get Washington moving a little bit in a slightly different direction. I think that most people would say that they would agree, right? They'd be surprised if there's not going to be some major bankruptcies, because while, like I said, liquidity seems okay now in most instances, I don't think anybody believes that we're going to have a snap back to normal this fall on the commercial aerospace.
That's great. How about in the leasing market? Does anyone have any insights on how domestic and international airlines are handling the leased planes and engines? What's going on with pricing? What does that equation look like today?
So this is John. So I can do, yeah. I'd rather not comment about lease rates. I'm not exactly, on top of that. But what I can tell you is that I think most lessors are dealing with a lot of issues with airlines asking for rent holidays, deferrals, things like that. So I think right now, in my estimation, most lessors of medium to large size are swamped with requests for rent holidays, and then that ultimately cascades into the funding sources for these lessors, whether it be in an ABS structure, whether it be in a term loan, or a warehouse. So the pain is being felt across the sector. There are, again, we talked about bright spots, and I think I'm walking a fine line here without disclosing too much information, but I think from the top of the airlines down, from healthy airlines that you would think are really strong pre-COVID, everyone has been asking for rent deferrals and rent relief and things like that, restructuring of transactions. So again, this is going to be a longer term situation. So I think right now we're taking a view of, okay, well, this is going to be how do we fix things for the next 90 days? And then after that, we come back and say, well, we need to do more. We need to do more. So I think, again, no one's really looking out past a year at this point in time. And most of the rent, I can tell you that most of the rent relief has been through year end. It hasn't been beyond. So I don't think anyone's willing to do that, to go beyond the calendar year end right now. Without calling the bottom, we're in a wait and see type of situation.
That's great. One of the areas that we've seen in both aerospace and beyond some pretty significant private equity attention over the years is just around training. And so, for instance, pilot training. There are various projections around the oversupply of pilots as this works its way through the system. What's the perspective on what that means for pilot training services? More important, less important? How does that ripple through that part of the market?
Yeah, and maybe I'll take a stab at this. We represented the sale of DAS Aviation to L3, so on the military training side, and certainly the military has always been challenged to retain people. But now, with the airlines not hiring, that's becoming a much different, thing. I think this, if I looked at, some of the silver lining, or at least, just for the industry in general, I think that there certainly will be a bit of I don't want to even say glut, but just a probably reduced demand for some of those commercial training programs in the near term. Certainly on the commercial aerospace side, as pilots, they're bringing fewer pilots on, upgrading fewer pilots, et cetera. So there's going to be certainly some tangible negative impact there. I think long term, though, and I'm probably more optimistic that we get back to flying at kind of an 80% level in 2021. I think that that long term this probably helps that balance and helps sort of fix the pilot training shortfall. That if you looked at any of the data up until February, there was really kind of we weren't really sure what was going to give, because there just weren't enough pilots being produced to fill the demand with all the retirements, and the military was strapped as well to keep their pipeline full.
Gordy, any thoughts on trends in mid-market aerospace M&A, specifically with respect to component manufacturers? And then maybe if you can touch on some of the important points to consider for private equity buyers looking at that segment.
Sure. Yeah. So on the component side, I think has been a little bit less impacted. A lot of the tier one suppliers, as well as OEMs, realize they have to keep the supply chain intact, and so there was already challenges with the slowdown in the MAX, or the slowdown caused by the MAX. But and so I think a lot of the component suppliers have been able to stay in production longer than they might otherwise have been. I don't think that part of the market has been overly negatively impacted, if that's enough qualifications, and seems to be in slightly better shape, particularly as depending on their focus. And what I mean by focus is, and this is the second part of your question around private equity groups, anyone obviously with military or aftermarket exposure is probably going to be in a slightly better spot. Obviously the MAX has their own issues. My hope is that gets worked out relatively soon, but we've got bigger fish to fry. So I think my overall advice would be for private equity investors would be to be careful. Diversity of platform as well as diversity of end market is going to be more attractive. And I know I mentioned military, but I think I'd even would look at some component manufacturers that have some GA exposure as well. I'd probably be a little bit more favorable to in this environment.
Great, thanks, Gordy. Relatedly, but a bit different on the investment side, on the emerging technologies, or deep tech, if you will. Anyone on the panel have thoughts about investing in these moonshot opportunities that maybe shorter term investment performance is unpredictable at best, but could lead to significant impacts in these industries in the future. Any perspectives that people want to share in that regard?
I think Mark was reaching out and talking about the flying automobiles and other vehicles of that sort. I think Mark mentioned it's a $75 billion industry today. Looking at it, companies are spending money in that space. So,
well, for the urban air mobility, that we'll see some R&D over the next 2 to 3 years. But as long as it's taken for the drone industry to take off, the technology outpacing the regulatory, we'll have the same thing in urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, and you add the infrastructure and the social acceptance, which will also be difficult. It's good that money is being put in that direction, but it's going to be a while. It's going to be several years before you'll see that even on a regular basis, much less to scale.
Shucks, I wanted to have my own flying car, so disappointed there.
One thing I would just add is, certainly as the environment's a little bit, different, and there's not as many M&A transactions, out there, we are seeing investors look at earlier stage, traditional private equity look at earlier stage investments, more growth equity, and I'll hold off with any specifics, but we are looking at, and I think we'll work on a earlier stage, very innovative business jet business and technology that I think could really revolutionize that segment through reduced fuel costs. And so, more on that to come, but I do think you might, people and investors start opening the aperture for growth when there's not as many regular way buyouts available.
Yeah, to that point, Gordy, you touched on clearly one of the tailwinds, if you will, if you can call it that, is the incredibly low price of oil these days. Will fuel efficiency, which has long time been a priority for airlines, will fuel efficiency continue to be a priority in the near to midterm? And what are some implications potentially on production and then down to the rest of the supply chain with these record low oil prices? Go ahead, Mark.
Yes. Well, it's a combination of two things. First is fuel efficiency is key even at the low price of fuel, because when you look at the old generation of plane and the new generation of plane, it's about a decrease of 25% of fuel consumption per passenger. So that's something that the manufacturer will continue to work on, and the airline will be looking for. And it has also a big impact on the carbon emission. And the second thing is that the new planes are bringing much lower cost of maintenance. And this is why you see a rush today on the new generation of plane. So I think the level of price of fuel is important, but it's a short-term issue. It's just a short-term adjustment. Maybe different in the business jet market. There are some projects also of supersonic business jet, which may come to fruition.
I was going to throw out one last question that we got from a friend of mine, so I'm going to ask it, but appreciate people may or may not want to consult with their lawyers before they answer the question. Which of the 4 domestic airlines is most likely to go under? I'm not going to touch that, but I felt the need to ask the question.
Well, look at the level of debt they have, and look how much exposition they have to international markets, and you may have a kind of beginning of an answer.
So what would that answer be?
I'm not going to give names.
Well, I'll be bold. I'll put it out there. I'm going to say Delta surviving. I love them. United, goodbye. I will be bold and do a completely answer that has no data behind it. Well, guys, we're coming up a little bit over an hour. I appreciate the time, and to the attendees, thank you for being patient. I would really appreciate some feedback after this. What did you like? What did you not? What can we improve on? We will send the deck afterwards, so you can kind of come through this. Once again, to all the attendees, thank you for your patience, and to the panelists and to our sponsor, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.